Welcome to episode 28 of Civil War Breakfast Club. I am your co host, Mary, and I am joined by my co host, Darren Weeks, who is on his own putting the Cape Cod beer industry out of business by doing Dry February.
Wow. Well, good evening to you. And you are dropping some facts here.
I
These poor
am.
people standing in front of the streets. Where's Darren's side? So that's okay. That's okay. So yeah. So good. Good to see you. How are things?
Good. How about you?
I'm doing a little list. Well, I see. All business ready to go here, huh?
Yeah, we actually are a little bit more pro tonight because we've got some new audio equipment that I bought.
What?
Audio equipment. You fucking heard what I said.
I know you sound like I don't know. Those swears are gonna come in like it's crazy audio now. So yeah, so those I thought going back to last week, I made a pretty good episode last week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Had some fun with that. I had a great live and good Facebook roundtable this past week. So yeah, we had a good. The Breakfast Club did good this past week. I thought we had a good.
Yes.
We had a good few days, and it was nice to get back into the battles again,
Mm-hmm.
right? You know, instead of those battles of you just beating me down all the time. Actually,
Jeez.
talk about actual history battles. So
February's
today
been
we're
a
going
bit
to
of a
talk about.
month.
Yeah, you haven't drank it, so you're brutal. You know, it's brutal. But
Home
one more week to
stretch.
go. We're almost at home
Home
stretch.
stretch,
It
fucker.
is.
Home
Ooh,
stretch.
there you go. Ooh, the audio sounds great. God, I mean, told off and
Surround
but
sound.
surround sounds like going to the theater and but we're gonna have some fun with this. We're gonna talk a little bit more, not so much battles per se. We're gonna talk more about a siege again. We're gonna stay out west and we're gonna talk about the siege of Meridian, the Meridian expedition. So this will be a lot of fun. We get to talk about our friend Uncle Blingy, William Sherman, among some other people. So this will be good. It's always fun to talk about some of the battles and some of the experiences that a lot of people don't probably study on, and it's fun to dust off the old knowledge on some of these campaigns. And this is certainly one that's a lot of fun to study.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing the research for this one because it's almost like one of those ones that is I don't know if I want to say footnote in history, but it's not talked about very much. But in doing the research, and I'm sure you found this too, like it is, I think, a huge factor in the March to the Sea. This is kind of like Sherman's experiment to see if
Mm-hmm.
if this kind of total war will work. It's not like the March to the Sea was not born, 3 weeks before.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it really, really happens. And there's going
Yeah,
to
I
be
mean this.
aspects that we're going to talk about that show that this is kind of where the idea of total war began.
I mean, this is they call it Sherman's proving ground, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was to your point, it was to see what they could do. And it's kind of like a rocket's about to take off from Cape Canaveral, and like they do that walkthrough before to see if it's
Yeah.
going to work. So basically, we'll talk more in detail about this whole thing. But basically, the Meridian, the campaign, he really has a couple of goals he wants to do, and we'll talk in detail, high level. Don't go back to low level, but he basically wants to protect the Mississippi River from guerrillas. He wants to basically operate deep in enemy territory, and he wants to basically destroy Confederate war-making capabilities along the Mississippi River. And he also wants to take out Nathan Bedford Forrest, who has been a pain in the ass up to
He
that
is.
point. And so that's kind of what he does. So real quick, Meridian, Mississippi, just about 150 miles from Vicksburg. It's got to be just a gaping target for Sherman. He just got to sit there because they're idle. There's not a lot going on. He just got to be sitting there thinking, this is a great opportunity. I mean, this is a city now, eastern Mississippi. It's got 3 intersecting railroads going right to it. It's a huge Confederate strategic location right between Jackson and that manufacturing center up there in Selma, Alabama. It's a big distribution center for products to Selma, grain, cattle, that whole area. So it's a big target of what they want to do. If they can go ahead and they can destroy that, it's going to put a real crimp in what the Confederates want to do as far as moving supplies in and around the area where we saw from Chattanooga, Chickamauga that had just kind of gone down. That's obviously the next big theater for the war for the West. It's going to be moving through Mississippi into Alabama and eventually to Georgia.
Yeah. And this is also, Sherman is also doing this to start waging that psychological warfare as well to
Yeah.
bring war to the people. Because from where he is in Vicksburg, his start off point, he's about 130 miles. So not as long as the March to the Sea at all.
Yeah, so we're just going to turn back the clock a little bit from this. So, for, right around Christmas time, December 1863, this is past Chattanooga. Things kind of settle down, right? Grant moves his headquarters up to Nashville, so he's up there checking out the. He must have been a big hot chicken fan up there in Nashville, and he basically he keeps George Thomas, General Thomas, in Chattanooga. He's going to be in charge of what's going to be the Army of the Cumberland at that point. Sherman is sitting in Bridgeport, Mississippi, which is just southeast of Vicksburg, and he's actually ordered to distribute troops along the railroad from Stevenson, Alabama to Decatur, basically heading back towards Nashville again, ironically, Mary, to repair railroads. So it's kind of funny how this whole thing goes. And the generals are kind of spread out a little bit here. So James Burbsy McPherson, see, I pronounced it right that time for you. Okay. He's still in Vicksburg. We'll talk more about these guys in detail, but he's still in Vicksburg. General Stephen Hurlbut, he's in Memphis. Hurlbut from South Carolina, ironically from Charleston, Mary. So there he goes, they're kind of spread out. The rebels still had a strong position in Mississippi. They were threatening the Mississippi River. It was still a stronghold for the most part. And Sherman, he doesn't like to sit in his hands. He sees an opportunity and he's going to go to Grant. He's going to make a pitch.
Yep. God bless ADD for that.
What?
Sherman, he's a little bit ADD at times.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying that as a compliment.
Oh, okay.
That's whole sit on your hands thing.
Oh, yeah. So Sherman, we mentioned before that Grant's up in Nashville. Okay. Yeah. So Sherman, he's gonna picture him bouncing off the walls. I mean, you just gotta imagine how he is, right? So he's gonna go to Nashville and he's going to see Grant and he's gonna say, hey, here's what I'm thinking. How about I grab a couple of guys and go fuck shit up? And Grant's like, okay, well, Washington's not going to like this too much, but I'll tell you what, I'll let you do it, but you got to get back here by March 1st. So this is right around, right after Christmas time. So he's like, well, right before Christmas, I mean. So he's like, all right, we'll see what happens. So he actually goes home for Christmas, and then he returns right afterwards. He goes to Memphis, and he starts to get his posse together. So he's going to go to Memphis, and he's going to meet with Stephen Hurlbut. He wants 2 good divisions. Just give me 2, he says, right? He goes, here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to take your guys, and we're going to go down towards Meridian, Mississippi, and we're just going to go try to scuttle it. We're just going to go to try to wipe it out. So also in Memphis, who does he run into? He runs into Brigadier General William Suey Smith, right? From Ohio, of course. And he's going to be a guy who's going to be in charge of the cavalry. Now, he's an interesting cat, Suey Smith, right? West Point, 1853. Right afterwards, he graduates, quits, gives up the old quit in 1854. He's going to join the Illinois Central Railroad. And he's an engineer by trade. That's what he is. So he's going to basically establish the Parkinson and Smith Engineering Company. And did you know, Mary, that he was the surveyor for a bridge that connected the U.S. to Canada?
I did.
In Niagara Falls.
I was just looking
the
at
bridge
that right now.
You are not allowed to cross, by the way.
I am not allowed to cross that bridge. But yeah, he was involved in the survey, one of the first surveys for the bridge to connect Canada and the U.S. near Niagara Falls. And then at the outbreak of the Civil War, he joins the 13th Ohio Infantry. And by June 1861, he is commissioned a colonel, and he's appointed Brigadier General of Volunteers in April of 1862. And he's commanding in Vicksburg, he commands the 16th Corps 1st Division.
Yeah, so he's got a little experience. I mean, up to that point, they were still taking those barrels over the falls, Do you know that? People don't realize.
That's how I was actually going to resort to coming over there.
Be a pretty small
that
barrel.
Or a catapult, I don't know.
A coffee can will take care of you. but basically, Smith has about 2,500 cavalry that he has at this point. And Sherman's going to basically say, here's what I want you to do, okay? Nathan Bedford Forrest, he's been harassing our garrisons in Western Tennessee and Mississippi. He's been a real pain in the ass. What we're going to do is we're going to give you we're going to end up with about 7,000 guys. You're going to take some of Hurlbut's cavalry, and we're going to send you right through Nathan Bedford Forrest territory, because we know he's going to find you, and we know you're going to fight him, and we know you're going to beat him. So
Yep.
while we're going to take care of Meridian, you're going to take care of this pain in the ass that we cannot get rid of. And so
Hmm.
Smith's like, all right. So fast forward now to the 27th of January, 1864. But before he does that, though, before I jump ahead, Sherman does tell Smith, listen, Forrest, this guy's nuts, by the way.
He does.
He's
He says that Sherman in his memoirs writes, I explained to him personally the nature of Forrest as a man and his peculiar force. So he's gonna like, this guy has the potential to fuck you up big
you know,
time. And Sherman tells him too that he will encounter Forrest, who always attacks with vehemence, for which he, like, which Smith must be prepared for. And after the first attack, he must in turn, assume the most determined offensive from Forrest. And he tells him, you need to utterly destroy his own force. So he's basically given Smith is the guy that the you've got one job guy. You
mhm.
know, he's about to go after this like Forrest is quite the reputation, and you have to remember like Sherman absolutely detests Forrest to the point where he said, I don't care how many men it takes, how many men will die, and if it
Mhm.
bankrupts the treasury, Forrest needs to die. Like
Isn't it
he had
something
it in for.
how history might have changed if Smith had got him? Just going
Oh,
forward, just one of
I
those
was
things.
thinking that, like,
You know,
wow.
in the Forrest has about 4,000 guys, okay,
Mhm.
but he's a madman. I mean, he is. And Smith, this is an engineer from West Point, and he's making his bridges, and Sherman's like, no, this is a different thing here. But you're gonna have almost twice as many guys, okay? We're gonna send you right into his nest and just deal with them. So Sherman's gonna leave. So 27th of January, he's gonna leave. He's gonna leave Memphis. He's gonna go back to Vicksburg, and he's gonna run into McPherson. Okay. And he gives him that same plan as well. But he also tells McPherson, before we go, I want you to get yourself a spy. I want you to take your spy, send him to Meridian. Okay. And I want you to find out the strength and the location of the army before we go. And that's kind of what we want you to do.
Mhm.
So a couple days go by, February 1st, 1864. It's almost high time. Sherman's sitting in Vicksburg. The spy returns, kind of like Henry Harrison, right? Gettysburg. The spy
Yeah.
comes back from earlier, and he tells him a couple, really three big pieces of information. One, Leonidas Polk is in charge. Okay, the old deacon Mary, he's in
Yeah.
charge, right?
Bishop Polk
Um,
is in charge.
the founder of the University of the South at Sewanee, which is still there, by the way.
Mhm.
He basically, Leonidas Polk from North Carolina, he's told he's in charge, his headquarters in Meridian. And this is getting towards, speaking of Polk, this is kind of, as your name is Lucia Polk here,
Yep.
it's almost the end of the line because a couple months more in Atlanta, he gets killed, right? He gets killed in an artillery attack ordered by you
Yeah.
know who.
Yep. He gets
Oliver Otis
take.
Howard orders
Yep.
artillery. So
Exactly.
I just had to find a way to get Howard into this. That
Nice.
there it is. So there you
There's
go.
our OO reference
That's
for
for
the
you.
show.
So you didn't think we could get Howard into this one, but we did. So there you go. All right.
Nice.
So, but the spy also tells him basically he's got two divisions of infantry led by William Loring, who's in
Mhm.
Canton, Mississippi, and
Yep.
William French, who's in Brandon, Mississippi. Um, he also tells him he has two cavalry divisions. One he already knew about in Forrest. The other he has Frank Armstrong. He also basically tells him that Polk has no idea that Sherman's thinking of doing anything. And
No.
he also tells him that Polk is scared shitless of Sherman. That he doesn't know he just in his head. He's just in his head. So Sherman has an opportunity. So a couple days later, the campaign's going to begin.
Yeah. And Sherman's biggest concern when he writes Nathaniel Banks on January the 31st, 1860.
From
Nathaniel Banks is from Waltham,
Waltham,
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, the greatest city in the world. Anyway, go ahead.
Yes. Did you know Loring's parents or Loring's father was from Massachusetts?
I mean, anything else? Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Go on.
And actually Hurlbut was originally from Mass too.
That I did not know.
Yep, he's originally from Mass too.
Okay. Well, yeah, I learned something new today. So
There you go.
congratulations.
I do research.
You do have company time at the old DQ, but that's
Yep.
okay. Februaries tend to be quiet in the old
Yep.
blizzards up there, so do some research.
But Sherman's biggest concern is the weather. And, we've talked in a few episodes, especially in the last, the one we just did about Henry and Donaldson, about how the weather factors into this. But
Mhm.
this particular winter had been, Sherman starts off in his memoirs in the chapter on Meridian saying it was already been cold and severe. And there was actually a chance that the Mississippi was not, they weren't going to be able to navigate on it because there was so much ice buildup on it. And
Mhm.
when Sherman was coming back from Ohio, like the ship he was on nearly sank from the ice and all that. But he tells Banks that the weather is his biggest concern. And they actually do encounter some rough weather on this march to Meridian, but it's not really like Sherman doesn't really talk much about it because they were able to move pretty smoothly through it. But yeah, the weather is definitely a concern for him
Mhm.
here.
Yeah. So February 3rd, 1864 is when the show is getting ready to begin. So um, Sherman quotes, he says, the goal is to break up the enemy's railroad and do as much damage as possible in February and be prepared by March 1st to get to assist General Nathan Banks in a similar dash at the Red River. So he's got that March 1st in his head. So he knows. He knows he's going to be done by March 1st. So he knows this has to be done on speed and surprise. So it's maneuver and logistics versus tactics in this one, right?
Yeah, yeah,
You're going to move quick, which we're going to see later on when we talk about Georgia. So he's going to go march 150 miles. He's going to live off the land, and he's going to recklessly expose himself to rebel attack from 3 directions. So he's really putting himself out there. And so he's, this is going to cause some serious anxiety in Washington because, like,
yeah.
whoa,
Well,
okay.
nothing like this has ever been done before, but just like you can see the March to the Sea starting to come out in this, like, because
Mhm.
he's got a right wing commanded by Mcpherson, he's got the left wing commanded by Hurlbut, and he's got cavalry doing a little bit of screening, but not to the extent that it's going to do on the March to the Sea. This is something that he
Mhm.
actually improves upon with the March to the Sea.
Yeah.
So when he leaves, like he says that writes in his memoirs, General Polk seemed to have no suspicion of our intentions to disturb his serenity. So it's like, we're going to go fuck him up. And
Yeah.
he's very confident going into this. He writes a letter to Ellen a few days before, and he said, I am now so situated that dismissal for any cause not involving absolute wrong would not concern me. Having done a full share of the real achievements of this war, I need not fear accidents. I do believe I can do more on the Mississippi than any general officer in the service except Grant. So he's going into this
Mhm.
really confident. It appears as
I,
though he's forgotten what happened at Missionary Ridge.
I think he had a lot
I
going on
think
at that
he's
point.
conveniently like
I mean,
real
if he's
achievements.
writing letters to Ellen, he must try to want to be on that TV show. That's probably where he was going with that. But he's basically, Washington is going to be nervous about what's going on because it hasn't been done before. But you
Yeah.
know who is not nervous is besides Sherman is Grant.
No.
Grant has the confidence in Sherman, and because he knows that if it goes bad, he knows he's going to be able to retreat. He's going to be able to get to the coast. He's going to be able to get to the Navy. He's like, I have confidence in Sherman. If things go bad, he's going to basically be able to pull it off. So you mentioned the cavalry. He's going to have E.F. Winslow's cavalry, a solid Mary from Augusta, Maine. He's going to have screening him. Not a big cavalry force, but to your point, he's got Burbsy on the right column. He's going to cross over the big black bridge there. Hurlbut's going to be in the left column to your point. He's going to cross the Messenger's Bridge. And you know what? He only is going to take 2 wagons for the whole
Mm-hmm.
150-mile trip. They're going to live off the land, use the resources. But you know what else? The other benefit of using the resources of the Confederates is the Confederates aren't going to be able to use it because they take it on them. So the
Exactly.
food, the supplies, anything they eat is food the Rebs aren't going to be able to eat. So there's that too, right? And there's that quote. He says, not a tent was carried. So these guys didn't have supplies as far as sleeping goes. It forced the troops to keep moving, is what it
Yeah.
did. So if you don't have tents, well, you got to keep moving. So they do run into a little bit of bumps on the road. February 6th, I mentioned Big Black. They run into that a little bit of rebel cavalry,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be driven back pretty easily because the cavalry is always going to get pushed back by
Yeah.
infantry.
Yeah. Sherman says we push them pell mell and beyond Jackson. That's a phrase that needs to come back into usage in this time.
I
Pell
use pell
mell.
mell probably once a day, Mary. Get with the
I've used it
program.
before too, but I think I'm the only one. I've said it recently, and I'm like, I will get looks like, what does that mean?
You should say it all the time. Not to confuse with Pall Mall, those cigarettes that you smoke
Yeah,
sometimes,
well,
but it's okay.
I've tried practicable. That one gets a few. Is that a
Oh.
word?
A little bit here and there. So February 9th, Sherman's sitting in Morton, Mississippi. And a couple of things about this. Morton's about halfway between Vicksburg and Meridian. February 9th is less than a week from when he started. So this is how fast he's moving. He's halfway there. He's been there less than a week. He sees signs of the rebel retreat. He sees the empty camp. So he knows they were there. And we're going to, as the timeline goes on, a couple days later, they end up at a place called Decatur, which we're going to talk about a little bit here, right? So they camp in Decatur, which is about Hurlbut passes through there, and he's about 4 miles ahead of Mcpherson. So there's a little bit of spread. You're talking about a 20,000 man army, basically, for the most part, right? They're going to camp in Decatur, okay? And old Uncle Blingy, Sherman, is going to end up sleeping in this log cabin owned by this woman, okay? And he's going to crash. He's going to fall asleep. So he's going to wake up to sounds of yelling and screaming, pistol shots. Sounds like your neighborhood, on a Saturday night in Goderich,
Saturday night.
No, crazy Saturday night.
Hey, I'm not kidding when I say we are like Appalachia, Ontario.
Oh, it certainly is. Women throwing rocks at kids in their front yard. Long story.
Hey, I'm 38. I've reached my get off my lawn stage.
Well, basically, so what's going on, obviously, is the area is being attacked by the rebel cavalry. So they're trying a little overnight attack. So Sherman's going to wake up and he's going to send Major Andon Reed to go find Hurlbut. Hurlbut, like I said, is a little bit ahead, right? He's go get him. We get a regiment back here, but this is because he's Sherman. This is about as close he gets to being captured in the war.
Yeah, really he even admits that it had the men not come back, he could have very well been captured by these. They were actually rebel cavalry.
Yeah. So Andon Reed ends up running ahead. He ends up getting Hurlbut and comes back with a regiment, and they do push the cavalry back. But Sherman is talking about, they almost got my ass. That was a little close. So eventually McPherson's column does arrive from a few miles back, and they end up spending the rest of the night in Decatur, and it's a pretty uneventful night for the most part at that point.
Every time I hear Decatur, I think of Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, yeah.
Where's your mom? She's in Decatur.
Decatur. You're just going to call me. Call me, maybe. And so fast forward, it's February 14th, 1864, which is the day I think it is, Valentine's Day again.
Yes.
Right?
Here we are. We're back at another episode with Valentine's Day.
Another Valentine's Day extravaganza.
2 years to the day from Henry and Donaldson.
Yep, exactly. So Sherman's going to enter Meridian. He's going to get there, and he's going to see again the enemy was there. Now this was Polk's headquarters, right? They've pulled back to a place called Demopolis, Alabama.
Yeah, he evacuated the dance floor because he got scared. Because the one thing that Sherman is doing on this march is he's fainting, and he's fainting towards Mobile, is one of the places. And the other thing that he's got Nathaniel Banks doing is he's got some boats running around in the area of Mobile to make it look like there's going to be an attack. And the feint plus these boats is so convincing that Polk has this like, fuck, I got to get out of here. And he fucking leaves. He's gone.
They're afraid. They were afraid they were going to go at Mobile. That was the whole thing.
Yeah, that was the whole thing. So, like he thought for sure.
And Sherman wanted them to think he was going to Mobile. Yeah. So you have Banks with the boats outside of Mobile. He's making it look like he's going to Mobile, and everyone thinks. And he even had to write a letter afterwards saying, "I didn't fail to take Mobile. I never planned it."
Yeah, well, he's got that letter to Banks on the 31st. Right. That
so he faked out his own guys because because what Polk is doing throughout this, we mentioned before, he's got Sherman in his head anyway. He's falling back. So Sherman basically takes Meridian and without really any struggle whatsoever. Now here's where the problem comes in, Mary. Okay, is he's supposed to meet his cavalry guy here. William Suey Smith is supposed to be here already. So Smith is supposed to, basically, he has a quote. He says, when he was basically, I have to write it down, but he basically says he was not arriving as ordered. He was nowhere to be found.
Yeah, he's not there.
So his 7,000 man cavalry is not there. Okay. So he doesn't know what happened to him. He doesn't disappear. It's kind of like Saturday night when people just vanish the face of the earth. And so the original orders were he was supposed to meet in Meridian on February 10th. Okay. This is 4 days before, right? And he ain't there. This is after he destroys Forest. Okay. He's going to destroy Forest. He's going to meet He's going to leave the first. That's what he's supposed to leave. He's going to defeat Forrest, meet me here in the 10th. That's the game plan, right? So he doesn't leave Memphis on the 1st. He leaves on the 11th. Okay. He leaves 10 days late. He was supposed to be there the day before. He leaves on the 11th because he's waiting on George Waring's brigade from Kentucky. They're supposed to come meet him to strengthen.
Yep. And they got backed up because of the weather, because of the ice on the river slowed them down. So you have Sherman waiting there with all his guys. And what does Sherman do? He completely destroys Meridian. Like
he does.
He tells his guys, like, Sherman's orders were wipe the appointed meeting place off the map.
He's basically like, you know what? I don't know where this guy is. We're going to wait here a few days. You might as well ruin the town, right? So, and Sherman's mad though. We joke about it. He's pissed. Yeah, he says it's a novel thing in war if infantry has to wait for the motions of the cavalry. So, and basically what happens with Smith is he starts late, and he starts coming down towards ironically a county called Chickasaw County. Funny how life is. And that's where Smith runs into Forrest, right? In a place called Okolona on February 20, right mid-February. So Smith runs into him, and they have like like sometimes you watch those movies in a bar and there's a fight, and it spills out of the next bar and it spills into the street, like the Westerns. That's what happens, except it's over an 11-mile area.
Yeah, and he's also getting chased by people who aren't with Forrest. It's random militias that start chasing
guys from Missouri coming out of the woodwork on him. So Smith's like, what in the crap? So he's getting hit with frontal attacks, flank attacks. He's being hit by militia, cavalry, clowns. Everything's coming at him, right?
The Loch Ness Monster.
And the only reason why Forrest stopped is he ran out of weapons, out of ammo.
Yeah, and Forrest's brother is actually killed at this battle. His brother Jeffrey is killed.
He dies right in Forrest's arms.
Yep.
It's very sad. So, so Smith ends up retreating in a panic back to Tennessee. I mean, not Forrest. I'm sorry. Smith ends up retreating back to Tennessee in a complete panic. And so Sherman doesn't know this is going on. Shitty internet in the South.
He does exactly, and he doesn't have any clue. Like he finally, I think it's on the 20th of February, he finally says to Mcpherson, Hurlbut, okay, like, we gotta go. The guy is obviously not coming.
Yeah. So he's gonna wait. He's gonna give him until the 20th, like to your point. And he's pissed off because you read his post-battle reports. He says Smith did not fulfill his orders, which were clear and specific. So going back real quick, we'll talk about what they did. So around the 14th, Sherman decides he's gonna go hog wild because he's already pissed. He's already got the gold. That was the plan anyway. He doesn't know if Forrest is destroyed or not. But he's going to use that time and he's going to go off. So he's going to basically just go complete wild on him. And basically, you look at Polk, he's sitting back, back in Demopolis wondering, when is this going to stop? He's not prepared for anything. And you wonder what would have happened if he did go with him. He probably would have chased him all the way to Cuba, the way it was going. But what he's trying to do, what Sherman's trying to do to Polk is he's trying to keep him guessing. To your point, they sent a raid up the Yazoo River, that whole thing. There's a thing called paralysis by analysis, right? You hear sometimes in politics and phrase where you want to get a guy so concerned, so freaked out, you just freeze, right? And that's what he's doing. He not only does he fake out Polk, he fakes out Joseph Johnston, who's sitting in Dalton, Georgia, going, "Shit, maybe he's coming at me." Right? So it's like you're sitting on the subway, right? And there's a crazy guy in the subway, and you're all sitting there quiet and not looking up because if you look up, he's going to come at you. And they're wondering, is he going to be coming at me? So they're all sitting back, scared shitless of Sherman going to be coming. And Sherman has a great quote where he says, "We put the enemy in the horns of dilemma," is what he says. So
yeah.
So he goes full blingy on Meridian. We talk about that. He sends detachments in all directions and just says, "Go get them, go get them," and that's what they do.
Yeah, and he says at the end of it, he said, "Meridian, with its depots, storehouses, arsenals, hospitals, offices, hotels, no longer exist. I have no hesitation in pronouncing the work as well done."
everything. They took out the depots, the storehouses, the bank barns, the hospitals, the
The
hotels.
big
They
barns.
took out everything's gone. And I know how you like to read the casualty numbers because you got that
Yeah.
ghoulish thing about you. Well, I'm going to do this real quick with what they actually destroyed, okay? Because it's a really impressive list. So
It is.
James Mcpherson, okay, he did most of the damage. They took out 55 miles of railroad, 53 bridges, 6,075 feet of trestle work, 19 locomotives, 28 steam cars, 3 sawmills, and a partridge in a pear tree. Okay, he took all that out. And Hurlbut, not as much, didn't take as Wheaties apparently. He took out 60 miles of railroad, 1 locomotive, and 8 bridges. Okay,
How many
now
bang barns
admittedly,
between the two of them?
probably not many, not the good ones anyway. So, but what happened? I mean, the Rebs, to their credit though, it doesn't take long for them to repair the railroad. It doesn't take long.
No.
But what they can't do is they can't replace the locomotives and the steam engines. So really what they did is they basically put them in a really, really, really tough spot as far as technology goes and as far as their ability to wage and war, which is what Sherman wanted all along.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, Sherman wanted to give this total war thing a try. And he says in his memoirs that the objective of the Meridian expedition was to strike the roads inland, so to paralyze the rebel forces that we could take from the defense of the Mississippi River, the equivalent of a corps of 20,000 men to be used in the next Georgia campaign. And this was
Mhm.
actually done. So he's also trying to reduce their get them
Yeah.
looking elsewhere as well. But he says, at the same time, I wanted to destroy General Forrest, who, with an irregular force of cavalry, he's basically saying like Forrest is being a shit disturber and he wants him gone. And Sherman writes in his memoirs, in this we failed utterly because General W. Soy Smith did not fulfill his orders. In Sherman's memoirs, Soy Smith is persona non grata.
Yeah, he
And,
is.
and apparently, after the war, Smith kept going to Sherman and saying, can you please forgive me for this? And Sherman, he he never did. Like he was like, and he says in his memoirs, he's a really nice guy and I like him, but this shit is on him and I am not taking this out of my memoirs and forgiving him.
He never forgave him because I mean, really, he let him down because his primary goal, or one of his primary goals, was unfulfilled. And so, February 26th, 1864, Sherman begins to pull back. He pulls back to Canton. And he's still, at this point, speaking of Smith, he still hasn't heard what
Nope.
what the friggin's going on here. So it's right around here is what he likely finds out about it.
Yeah.
Because this is when he goes off the grid. He loses his mind. He's pissed at at what's going on. He's disappointed. And to your point, he writes a letter to Grant and says how disappointed he is in Smith, which is big because he's going to the commander of the army, throwing this guy under the bus, right?
Yeah. He's not saying,
Right.
I'm not angry. I'm
Well,
just
he writes
disappointed.
he writes that thing exactly. He writes that classic Civil War letter. He says, "I regard him as a most accomplished gentleman and engineer." Okay, but never regained my confidence in him as a soldier. So what he's doing is he's telling him, yeah, he's a good engineer, but he's a shitty soldier, right? So he put that engineer thing's not by a mistake. He put it in by reason
Yeah.
that he's not fit to be a soldier. So, and eventually Smith, he's going to resign. July of 1864, he resigns. You know why? He gets arthritis. And he
Yeah.
resigns. Ends up returning to being a civil engineer again. Rest of his life, he's just going to be an engineer. He's going to die around 1915, 1916, something like
Yep.
that. But that's going to be it for Smith. And so that's going to be the end of that. And so, so Forrest, he doesn't get stopped. He continues to do what he's going to do. It leads to all the things that he did the rest of the war and after the war, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it makes you wonder, that is an interesting what if. Like, what if Smith had managed to stop Forrest? Like, how would it have been different? Like, I didn't like O'Connell in his book Fierce Patriot biography about General Sherman. Like, he has this theme throughout it about how much Sherman hates Forrest, just wants to go after him. And this is one of those times. And I think, I was kind of thinking, like, well, why doesn't the Meridian campaign get talked about more? And I'm wondering if it's because this was a huge thing for Sherman to get Forrest. Like, I think for him, it was nearly as big as getting Meridian, if
Well, I
not a
think,
little bit more than that.
well, remember, Sherman's coming off of that shaky performance in Chattanooga, right?
Exactly.
So this is more of just not just a proving ground for George. It's a proving ground that he still got it.
Yeah.
And now he goes to Meridian. He does what he's supposed to do. But part of the deal with the Graham was he was going to get Forrest. That was part of the deal,
Yeah.
So, but he has to go. So the 27th, he's going to leave Canton. He's going to head for Vicksburg. He's going to give Hurlbut the keys to the car. He's going to say, "You're in charge." He says, "Stay here till March 3rd, and then get your ass back to Vicksburg," which is what he's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's going to, basically for the most part, he's going to get back, and it's going to help prepare for that future thing. But for the most part, the Forrest thing notwithstanding, it's almost a perfect campaign,
It
right?
is.
If you think about everything, because what they did as far as all those things, that destruction we talked about, they put the Rebs back significantly in materiel. Now, did he? If he got Forrest, it would have been. If they had gotten Forrest there, I think it would have been. This would have been up there with the March to the Sea as far as an overall Sherman success story.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, that it would be more talked about. But I think because of that aspect with Forrest, because that was, a major part of the campaign, it's not something that's spoken about because it was a
No.
failure. And really, it's like, okay, we went and destroyed a town, and that, and then we marched back again, and it was basically like, just like O'Connell in his book Fierce Patriot says, it was done with an experimental frame of mind, and it will eventually provide the template for the March to the Sea. Like, this is him this is him getting ready to do the march. Now, the one thing that Sherman does with this is, the one thing that um you hear a lot with the March to the Sea is talking about the destruction of property, the taking, what they didn't take, they burned, the ripping up of railways and all that. Um, Sherman's Sherman actually did some research into if this type of warfare was considered, I don't want to say humane, but you know what I mean? Like, if it was considered right to do this type of warfare, because, in the Civil War, they fought like, they're looking at things like Jomini, they're doing Napoleonic style tactics. But as we see at this time, the face of war is starting to change. So Sherman looks to what they're doing in Europe, and, he's seeing the Napoleonic style tactics in that. But then he looks to what um, some British monarchs did in Ireland. And what they
Mhm.
did is they took the Irish off their land, they took their food and all that. And they basically did what Sherman was about to do. And he's like, there's my justification for this. But the other thing too that Sherman writes, and I think he writes this to Grant, and I think he writes it to his brother as well. But he talks about how, like, this type of warfare is going to cut down on the number of lives lost.
Mhm.
He's not putting a bunch of men at risk. And I had never ever, as much as I've studied Sherman and the March to the Sea, I'd never ever, you know, seen that was one way he was thinking. He was thinking, how can I also save lives, but end this war quickly?
Well, it shows. I mean, he was a flanker. He was a feigner. He wasn't
Yeah.
a. I mean, if Cheatham Hill, notwithstanding, in some places like that, he never went attack the front. He was always trying to protect lives. And when people in the South talk about what a butcher Sherman was and all that stuff, what he ultimately did, I know we're jumping off target here, but what he ultimately did with his march to the sea was he expedited the end of the war, which
Mm-hmm.
probably saved thousands of lives, because that would have gone on and on and on.
Yeah.
you know. And so, Shelby Foote calls Meridian, he calls it, this was something of a warm up, he says, in that Ken Burns thing. And he's right. He's exactly right.
Yeah.
It's basically what he did. What he did is he took a concept of what he wanted to do, and he delivered on that concept. And he took that. What you can say about Sherman, you can say a lot of things about Sherman,
Mm-hmm.
but what he does, he learns from his experiences and he
Oh, he
takes them,
does.
right?
Yeah, he
And I
does.
don't
He
think
does. Oh,
he
sorry,
doesn't
go
get enough
ahead.
credit for that. He doesn't get enough credit for that, because when
No.
when he makes a mistake, he doesn't repeat it, and when he finds something that works, he enhances it. And so he takes the learnings, he takes the experiences from Meridian to the March to the Sea, which is march to enemy territory, live off the land, demoralize, a total war. Uh, you know, uh, take away the enemy's resources. And the total war thing is kind of a silly thing if you really think about that phrase, because yeah, they were doing some things, but for the most part, they were moving quick. They weren't staying in places and destroying everything. The whole thing with this was speed and time. They ain't got the time. They wanted to get to Meridian and back. Grant gave him that timetable. You've got to be back here by March 1st. I'm not sure what's going on March 1st, but
Mhm.
be back.
Yeah.
Maybe something was going on, but he wants to be obviously he wants to be ready for the spring campaign of 1864. But it's really a huge, to your point, you said it's a huge point of the evolution of warfare at that time, from getting
It
away from
is.
that Jomini Napoleonic type of style. It's kind of a throwback, a harkening back to maybe the American Revolution as far as that type of style,
Yeah.
but it's not done out of bloodshed. It's done for demoralization. It's
Mhm.
done to deny supplies, and done for the most part to help pave the road for what his army is going to ultimately do, which is bring the whole army, including Grant, down through ultimately through some other parts to really expedite the end of the war. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And Marzalek, hope I'm saying his name last name correctly, in his book called Sherman, A Soldier's Passion for Order, he talks a lot about the Meridian campaign and just like what O'Connell says, this very experimental thing that he's doing is the kind of the March to the Sea precursor to see if this is going to work. And he says that Sherman, one of the things that Sherman was taking into consideration is the fact that, like, Sherman is a person who he very much likes the people of the South. A lot of his friends are Southern, and he is in an area actually where he does have friends. And rather than take the lives of those friends, like, doing a pitched battle like Shiloh, he much preferred to do a raid. So a march like he does from Vicksburg to Meridian and then later from Atlanta to Savannah, because he didn't want to risk like those friends being killed or something like that. He had friends who were fighting on that side and he knew they could be fighting against him. So that was something else he took into consideration. And that was quite appealing to him. And the other thing that Marzalek says, if the Meridian raid proved successful, it would show once and for all that crippling the enemy's ability and will to fight was the most efficient and least fatal way to wage war. So even at this point in 1864, Sherman is thinking, how do we end this quickly? As you said, like about the March to Sea, he found a way to end it quickly without a lot of lives being taken.
Mm-hmm.
And he realized too that he could march through Confederate territory and feed his army at the expense of its inhabitants. Therefore,
Mm-hmm.
they are not able to wage war against him because he's taking their supplies. He's also destroying the railroads as he's going. And again, it goes back to this: there's not going to be the slaughter of thousands of soldiers, and he's thinking of both sides of
No,
this.
I mean, you think about it, they ultimately take out 61 total bridges. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there were that many bridges in Mississippi, to be honest, but
Yep.
they must have got all of them. And you're looking at the fact of taking out 20 locomotives, how long and expensive those are to build, and all of the railroad tracks and stuff like that, the Sherman neckties and all those things. A lot of that is a little overrated because you can fix those pretty quickly, but they couldn't replace that hardware, and that was the biggest problem.
Yep.
And as we found out as the war went on, how think of when Lee is going through his final death throes heading towards Appomattox.
Yep.
They had to surrender because they had no supplies. They had no way to get it to them. They had no way to get weapons, no way to get food. Everything was delayed, and that is all the work that's being done from these other campaigns. Not so much attacking soldiers, but attacking means of delivery to supply these soldiers. And it's not something that's talked about a lot. People talk a lot about the Pickett's Charge and about the Mule Shoe and Hornet's Nest and all these horrific battles, but it's what they did to prevent more bloodshed, more battles, that ultimately was what won the war. You know.
Yep, exactly. And that's how Sherman was thinking. And when I read that, when I read about Marslake's argument about the fact that Sherman had friends in the South and that he could potentially be facing them or their sons or whatever, that's when it was like, well, this is what he's trying to not just, I don't think he's just trying to save the lives of his own men. He's looking to the other side too, because there's this, he was just a man who was for the Union, right? But he had friends who lived in the South. And I had never, I don't know, that was a huge thing for me to read that he was, this is a way to save lives in the long run.
Yeah. Well, they talked about that. How many lives ultimately were saved by what he did. And people didn't realize it at the time. Certainly people don't know but know it now, especially if you go down to Georgia. They think
Oh
it's quite the
yeah.
opposite. But when you look at ultimately what his goals were, you look at that original quote he had, it was to go to Meridian, destroy as much as he could, and be back by March 1st. Yes, he didn't get forced. That was the one thing that didn't
Yeah,
happen. But for the most part, beyond that, it was pristine. They only
it
lost
was.
170 guys out of 20,000.
Yeah.
You know, you could take 20,000 people and you could walk to Rhode Island, you're going to lose 170 today. Okay. So when you think about that, the fact that that's all they lost, and it's just, it's remarkable. And no one knows how much the Confederates lost because they kept running, they kept turning and
Exactly.
going.
Yeah, yeah. The
You know,
casualties are very low in this campaign, much like just the same with the March to the Sea, right? Like the March to the Sea doesn't have a lot of, I mean, still has
no,
casualties, which is sad, but not as many if they were fighting pitched battles like Shiloh, like Gettysburg, like Antietam,
no.
you know.
Polk was turning and going. He must have Howard's playbook. He must have picked it up in Chancellorsville. But you know
Listening to
what though?
Born to Run.
Oh,
Um,
exactly.
the other thing to mention about this too is also something that happens on the March to the Sea, and this is it doesn't get talked about a lot with the Meridian campaign, but there are escaped slaves that are joining Sherman on this, just
Mm-hmm.
like on the march. And it apparently drew them. O'Connell says it drew them like a magnet, and they picked up between 5 to 8,000. It's not sure exactly how many, but there was one soldier that wrote, and a lot of these guys are going to be seeing slavery for the first time. And he wrote in his diary, they form a mournful curiosity with their lacerated backs, branded faces, and ragged garments. They are of both sexes and every shade of complexion. They vary in age from 1 month to 100 years. Some were on foot, some on horseback, some in ox carts. So this is the same as what's going to happen on the March to the Sea. So again, like on the March to the Sea, this is not Sherman's first time having escaped slaves coming with him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gonna tell the story. It is funny though how Meridian is basically a microcosm of what's going to come later. It's
It
almost
is.
exactly half the distance too,
Yep.
right?
And it's the experiment that nobody talks about. And
Mm-hmm.
I think to look at the Meridian campaign is to have a better understanding of the March to the Sea, because the Meridian campaign is where Sherman does his research on, okay, is this type of warfare okay? It's different from, Jomini, it's different from Napoleonic style tactics. And then he finds that, cases in where the British monarchs are doing this to people in Ireland. And he's like, okay, if they're doing it, then I can do this too. So I don't want to say it's
Mm-hmm.
justification, but he's found, to see if it's okay to do this. And he
No, but
realizes
he's
it's been
had
done
he's had
before.
this. You can tell he's had this idea in his head for a while. When
Oh,
he
it
was
began
back
in
in
Vicksburg. It
when he
began
was
in the Vicksburg campaign.
even before that, he
Yeah.
knew that the only way they were going to be able to win this war was to take it to the streets, take it to the people, and make
Yep.
them want to stop fighting. Ironically, it was the same game plan that the Rebs had, was to make the North sick of fighting and quit.
Yep.
And ultimately is what Sherman certainly did. But it's a good study though. It's one that really, no one really stands out, talks MVPs and things like that, because it's like I said, it's more of just
No,
a
there's
march. I mean, Sherman's game plan. I mean, obviously, what he did to fake out Polk as far as going to Mobile and using banks to cover it was brilliant in that regard. He was able to keep everyone at bay without knowing where he was going, to the point
mm-hmm.
where he faked out, like we said, Joseph Johnson had no idea where he was going.
Yep.
Um, and so when he did start that march, right, later on, it was a similar thing again, right? They didn't know where he was going. Is he going to Macon? Is he going to Augusta? Is he going to Savannah? Is he going all kinds of places? Ended up being poor Savannah, of course,
Poor Savannah.
but poor Savannah again. But ultimately what it does, it helps create that mystique of Sherman, where it just makes people tremble in their shoes, even mentioning his name. Because not only is he good and is he aggressive, he's smart and he can outthink you. And he's got you beat. He's like a really good football coach, right?
Yep.
Where he has you beat before the game even starts because he psychs you out. And that's who Sherman was. And he really proved that going forward. And it shook off kind of that stink of Chickasaw and that
Yeah.
stink of Chattanooga.
And Missionary Ridge and all that. Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, the letter he writes to Ellen, he's very confident going into this, and it's probably because he's starting to do something a little bit different. then this is something that hasn't been really tried before. And yeah, it does begin in the Vicksburg campaign. And the funny thing is when it's on the Vicksburg campaign and they're raiding people's houses, Sherman's like, nope, we can't do that, that's wrong. And then you flash forward to Meridian, he's like, fuck that, take their shit.
But and he learned his lesson. He was almost got caught in Decatur, and that would have been a huge disaster
Oh
for the Union
yeah.
if Sherman got caught. Right? I mean, can you imagine old Uncle Blingy heading off to Libby prison?
Oh god.
But I think but it would have changed everything. So this march was not without risk, and Washington and Lincoln and Halleck and all them were nervous for it for that reason, and justifiably so. They were nervous, but Grant had the confidence in him, so when he went back later and wanted to march to Savannah, these are the things that are on the back of Grant's mind, right, in the back
Yep.
of Lincoln's mind. So it helps develop that cult of personality that is also breeding confidence that this is a guy who's going to either do what he's going to do, or if things go bad, he's going to find his way out, right?
Yep. And
And
you
that's
got
who
to
Sherman
wonder
was.
if
That's who he was.
And you got to wonder too if the people that experienced this in Meridian or in that were in that 130-mile you know trek from between Vicksburg and Meridian, if they lived somewhere along the way, if somehow word had got to Georgia, this is what he did,
Mhm.
you know, and Sherman would have just went with that. He would have went with like, let them talk about me, let them hype it up, let them be scared, because that's what he wanted, you know.
That's exactly what he wanted. And he wanted to again, he wanted to just develop that fear of what he was going to do. But it was also it wasn't a reckless attack. You know, Grant gets called the butcher, and Lee has those high death
Yep.
numbers. But what Sherman did is he ultimately did look to protect his soldiers, and having the low death counts and low casualty numbers shows that he wasn't just about to throw into the meat grinder to do this. So it was strategic. It was done. It was a thinking man's expedition, is what it really
Hmm.
really was.
Yeah.
And Sherman gets, Sherman. You talk about the fire, and we perpetuate it ourselves, make fun of Sherman
Oh
all the
yeah.
time. But what he did is he was not someone who unnecessarily took risk. He
Hmm.
was someone who took a calculated risk, and it showed.
Yeah,
Meridian's a great
exactly.
example of that.
It is, yeah. And like I said, it's definitely something that, if you studied the March of the Sea, look at Meridian first, because there's a lot. And he does learn, like he learns how to better utilize the cavalry, because the rebel cavalry was constantly at him on this march, to the point where they had to march very narrow. They're not in that. Now again, there's less men on this one, but the March of the Sea is they're cutting this 60-mile swath. They're like a 60-mile wide land shock going through Georgia, right?
Yeah, but you know what though? They were dealing with Frank Armstrong. They weren't dealing with Forrest too.
Exactly. Yeah.
They weren't dealing with the A team. Old
Yeah.
Suey, unfortunately, was dealing with
He's
deal.
persona non grata. There's no MVP in this battle, but there is a persona
No,
non grata,
no,
and it's poor Soy Smith. He's,
no. Suey Smith had his ass dragged for 11 miles.
but like I think it might have happened to any of them because of Forrest's reputation. Like Forrest was just, he's insane, right? And like he's outnumbered by the Union, but he's still able to beat them.
Almost, well, he was, but he had those Missouri militia guys came and help
Yeah.
him push him back too. But you're still going into it. It's 7,000 to 4,000. It's almost 2 to 1, not quite,
Yeah. But
but
why you
regardless.
wouldn't let Sherman know what the fuck is going on? you know?
Well, I mean, he gets pushed back to Tennessee, and
Yeah.
he was running. He was literally getting his butt kicked while he was running,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think he was too quick to tell little Uncle Blingy what happened either. I think he's like, well,
No.
let's just get back and we'll deal with that later.
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe it was the arthritis that did him. Who knows?
Poor guy.
So what's coming up next? What's coming down the horizon for the Old Breakfast Club?
So next week we will be talking about the Pea Ridge Battle of Pea Ridge,
Mm-hmm.
which we're headed. It's not really the Western Theater; it's the Trans Mississippi, right?
I guess it would be. Well, it's still
Yeah,
sort of west. I still think of it as
yeah.
kind of
I
west, but
mean, there
yeah,
are people that like to call it the Trans Mississippi Theater.
those people,
What-
I don't like doing labels. Okay,
Earl Van Dorn is back
uh,
though next week.
you're down with EVD. We'll be
Yeah, I am.
talking with him next week.
That sounds like a STD.
Sounds like an AP Hill situation.
That
right
sounds
there.
like something you pick up at the
Oh, I got that
the
damn
bang bar.
EVD. Oh
I
my
got
god, that
that
sounds
EVD
horrible.
from the bang bar.
Go. Did you get it at Holly Ridge? I know it's Holly Springs. I know.
So yeah, we will be Battle of Pea Ridge, and then after that, I think we are still okay. It's not really Western Theater. The Battle of Bentonville, which is going to be part 2 of our Carolinas campaign, and then we are going to
Oh, we're talking Carolinas. Here we go again, huh?
yeah Bentonville,
Mm.
Battle of
Well,
Bentonville.
that'll be going. So it's nice to be back in that battle mode again, right?
Yeah,
So we'll be doing our live again, talking about this, and we'll get off to Pea Ridge, we'll get off to Bentonville, and it won't be long, Mary, until we'll be doing our roundtable again on St. Patty's Day,
St. Patrick's Day.
which
Yes,
has disaster written all over
it
it, but we'll have
does
fun with that. And
because
then
we're
of
not going to
course
be
the book,
dry in March as of.
and that's true. And then of course this book club that seemingly we had this idea 10 years ago is finally going to be
I
happening.
know it seems like so. It seems like so long ago, but this is our first time doing it, so maybe we'll tweak it for 2022.
It
Who
is.
knows?
We're definitely looking forward to that. So good things coming
Yeah.
down the pike. So we'll leave it here with this, and we'll get ready to talk about Pea Ridge and all the fun and games taking place in the Trans Mississippi area. So good podcast. I thought it was pretty solid. It was always fun talking about old Uncle Blingy and
Yep.
talking about the gang of old Burbsy and Stephen Hurlbut
Yep.
and the rest of them that people don't really get a chance to. We don't talk too much about them, but it's something that we can definitely look to expand upon as we talk about some of these future battles and some of these guys continue to be more colorful as the rest of them are.
Yes. Well, that was a very enjoyable discussion as always. So,
Hey, like I said many times, the pleasure was all yours, Mary.
Walker.
Yep, there you go.
So, everybody listening, thank you for all your support. We've actually just surpassed our 6-month anniversary with doing this podcast. So,
No one's been killed yet.
Not yet.
Not me, anyway. She hasn't killed me yet, so that's a good thing. That's a good thing. All right, Mary. So we will look forward to talking to you soon, everybody. Thanks for listening. Hope to see you on the live on Saturday, and we will begin to change our gears from Meridian to Pea Ridge. Any final words from you, the Queen of Kincardine?
Well, everybody have a good night, and this was a pleasure as always, Darren.
Absolutely. Well, peace out, everybody.
See you later, guys.